Well, hey, at least they showed up and played some hockey. It's a low bar, but given how the last two games went and that we're going into the holiday break, you take the positives where you can. What's cracking, everybody, and welcome back once again to Kraken R&R, where, kind of opposite to the game previous in Vegas, this was a closer game than the score makes it look, as the Kraken lose their fifth straight 5-2 to the Colorado Avalanche just before going into the holiday break. A holiday break that could not be coming at a better time for the team, who very much desperately needs at least a mental break, if not a physical one. But you know what, since we are going into the break for the holidays, in an effort to at least give some kind of positive spin to where things are right now so that it's not all doom and gloom as we go through almost week without the Kraken, and because they did at least show up to play this game, and yeah, the bar was pretty low coming out of the four previous games where it seemed like the Kraken were playing worse and worse as each game went along, since they did show up and at least kept this game close against a Colorado team that, even if they aren't necessarily where they'd like to be at this point in the season, they are playing a lot better of late and starting to get hotter, and the Kraken were coming in on the second half of a back-to-back with a pretty heavy schedule that they've had so far as how many games they've played. We'll give them the benefit of the doubt, at least to some degree. Was it their best game? Certainly not. There were lots of things that still needed to be cleaned up, but at least it was a game that we could watch all the way to the end and wonder if there was a chance that they could potentially win it. As expected, though, coming into the game, the Kraken still did make a couple of changes after the game in Vegas that was another disaster. One of them was a unplanned change. I think Tanev probably would have played in this game if he could have, but he was a scratch with a bit of an injury coming out of that game in Vegas. And that leads them to then make a couple of different changes. They bring Ben Myers up to center of the fourth line. Andrei Burakovsky actually comes down to the wing of the fourth line, as things still have not gotten off the ground for him so far this season, or really at all since he dealt with those two big injuries in the first couple of years he spent with the team. And then Yanni Gourde goes from that fourth line center role up to the wing of Shane Wright, who also on his other wing gets a new guy in Jared McCann. Well, I say new guy, a new guy to Shane Wright. McCann and Wright had not really played a ton on the same line together, but yeah, Wright with Gourde and McCann on either side of him, with McCann and Schwartz changing places. So now Schwartz goes up to play with Beniers and Kakko in this game. I don't know if it was that change or what, but that line that was, again, completely dog walked all game in Vegas, absolutely run out of the building, had a complete 180 and were easily the best line on the ice for the Kraken in this one. And of course, Decord in net instead of Grubauer. As the game gets started, though, I don't know if it was the tired legs from the second half of a back-to-back or just more of how the Kraken had played the two previous games, but it was another pretty sloppy start to this one, as it looked like another game that could get ugly fast, especially when not only are the Kraken giving up chances in their end of the ice to the Avalanche, really making Decord work hard out of the gates, but in the middle of the period, they give Colorado three back-to-back-to-back power plays, which even against a Colorado power play that has not really gotten going so far this season, there's enough talent on that power play that you can't give them 6 minutes of power play in the middle of the first period and not expect them to score once. It does take them through the first one, which the Kraken kill off pretty well, but even with the good kill, not long after they get back to 5-on-5 with Tolvanen out of the box for putting the puck over the glass, Montour goes right in to take his spot, the seat's still warm in the penalty box. It's a trip for Montour, and this time Colorado does take advantage. It takes them about halfway through the power play, but the first unit doesn't even leave the ice before eventually it's Cale Makar with the puck just looking right down at the net, waiting for the screen to hit the perfect spot. Eventually it does. He fires off the shot. Decord can barely see it coming, and he has to be standing all the way on his tiptoes to even get a chance to see the shot. Makar puts it out to the side of him into the near side of the net before Decord has a chance to get down and react to the shot. So Colorado takes the 1-0 lead. Then, of course, a minute later or so, it's another penalty for the Kraken. Vince Dunn goes to the box for a hold, and things just keep going from bad to worse for Seattle. Mercifully, the Kraken are able to kill this one off as well, or maybe I should say, they kill this one off just as they did with the first one, and then even manage to stay out of the penalty box long enough for the bench unit to cool. I mean, actually all the way until the end of the second period, so they stayed out of it for quite a while in comparison to how quickly they've been going into it here over and over in the first. But even with that being the case, the scares for the Kraken were not over as they continue to let Colorado get into the offensive end, get set up, and really make Decord work. And eventually, a shot on Decord catches him in the inside of the armpit on his right arm, and play eventually gets whistled dead about 30 seconds later without another shot coming on him. But you could tell right after that shot hits him in the arm, he's favoring that side heavily. Eventually the trainer comes out, Decord goes to the bench, we go to a TV break. And boy, if there is a player on this team the Kraken cannot afford to lose right now, if they want any chance of making this season matter in the back half of it, it's Joey Decord. Grubauer has been pretty good in relief of Decord here and there, but even with that being the case, I just don't really think Grubauer is the guy that can be your game in, game out starter and turn you into one of the best teams in the NHL, which you might need to be in the back half of the season to get at least one of those wild card spots. So yeah, you can ill afford to have Decord go down. The good news, though, is that even though it looked pretty bad, he was hunched over all the way out to the bench as they went to commercial. By the time they come back, he's back in net and looking maybe not no worse for wear, but certainly was able to move around somewhat normally throughout the rest of the game. Now, I can hardly imagine that his arm is going to be feeling particularly good here for the next few days, especially considering there is little to no padding even for goaltenders where that puck hit him, and it's an NHL shot that got him there, so yeah, there probably is going to be a healthy bruise and a lot of soreness, but the good news for the Kraken, and especially Decord, is that they got a few days for him to rest up and hopefully heal all the way back up for Vancouver on the 28th. Meanwhile, as far as the rest of the game is concerned, maybe seeing Decord leave the ice even for just a little bit with a potential injury was enough to scare the team into turning things around as they finally start to press back the other way in the last couple minutes of this first period. And eventually they even get a goal at 5-on-5, which is not something we've seen a lot of here over this last stretch of games. And it's a goal for the Kraken that comes off of a very hardworking, great, almost individual effort play from Shane Wright as he gets the puck through the neutral zone, works it past a Colorado player across the blue line into the offensive end, drops it to Gord to get a little bit of space. Gord gets it back to Wright as he goes down behind the net. Eventually Wright firing it up into the slot where suddenly there's actually a Kraken player going to the net. It's Jared McCann with his stick on the ice, and he shovels it over the pad and into the far side of the net to give the Kraken their first goal of the game, their first 5-on-5 goal from a forward since they beat Boston 5-1 over a week ago. And McCann, his first goal in quite a while, aside from the empty netter that even at that was a few games ago. Though even with McCann's lengthy scoring drought, since nobody else on the team over that span has been scoring all that consistently, aside from Bjorkstrand and I suppose Wright as well, this being McCann's 12th of the season once again gives him the lone team lead. So it'd be nice if some other guys could kind of start to pick things up and not put the Kraken scoring all on the shoulders of McCann for once. At least for the time being, though, in this game specifically, thankfully this goal was not a one-and-done offensive burst from the Kraken, as they're able to maintain a little bit of momentum into the first intermission and then keep it going to start out the second period, where the start of the second period for them is maybe the best they've looked at 5-on-5 since that win over the Bruins way back midway through the homestand before this whole losing streak started, as the Kraken are getting great chance after great chance, a couple nice saves from Blackwood, and eventually it's going to end up paying off for them here early in the second as the Kraken take the 2-1 lead, but not necessarily in the way that you would expect with all this offensive zone pressure. They get an offensive zone faceoff, which is what you would expect with all of that pressure and the shots on goal that they were getting. But the goal comes so quick off the faceoff that it catches everyone off guard, even the TV crew. Forsland doesn't even realize what's happened for a couple of seconds before eventually realizing that Beniers won the faceoff out to the side for Kakko, who's the one farther away. He's the one out by the boards. He just skates up and fires off the shot using even the linesman as a bit of a screen here. So I don't think literally anybody other than Kakko saw this coming. He fires off the shot. It goes right through the 5-hole of Blackwood into the back of the net to give the Kraken the 2-1 lead and give Kakko his first goal as a Seattle Kraken. So at least for a moment anyway, it really does seem like that scare that Decord gave the team by going to the bench with an apparent injury is what they needed to flip that switch and suddenly look like the team that we knew they could be, as they've scored twice on the Avalanche and have been all over them here to start out the second period. But unfortunately, I used the words "in a moment" for a reason, and that's because this 2-1 lead for the Kraken and the momentum that they'd built lasts for all of 11 seconds, as off the ensuing faceoff, the Kraken actually win it back cleanly to Jamie Alexiak, and then he just makes a somewhat careless pass up in the neutral zone to try and start a breakout to Shane Wright. It's a bit in Wright's feet, which normally wouldn't be that big of a problem, but the player that's covering Wright is Nathan MacKinnon, who quickly pounces on the loose puck, takes it the other way, and just does Nathan MacKinnon things. He powers his way past, rushing into the offensive zone, past Alexiak, curls up by the net, and while Decord is able to make the save, MacKinnon is able to force a rebound from Decord that goes right up into the slot, where the next guy in and first to the puck is Nichushkin. He puts the puck into basically an empty net, as the other thing MacKinnon was able to do with his net front drive was force Decord to one side of the net. So not only does he force a rebound, but he also takes Decord pretty much out of the crease, which gives that empty net for Nichushkin to put it into and tie the game right back up at 2. And sure enough, one of the fastest response goals we've ever seen come against the Kraken, and we've seen a fair number of response goals come against the Kraken over the years, is also what kind of kills that momentum that they built through the end of the first and start of the second. Most of the rest of the second is pretty back and forth, so it doesn't entirely kill off the Kraken offensive chances, but it does certainly spread them out, as most of the offensive zone time from here on out will be Colorado's. The Kraken still getting their chances here and there. They will get one more pretty good set of shifts. I think 3 back-to-back shifts they get, or at least 2 back-to-back shifts they get with Colorado hemmed into their end of the ice midway through the second period. Unfortunately, this also comes to an end in a bad way. Not only do the Kraken not score this time, but a puck loose on the blue line gets poked past, I think it's Vince Dunn, or maybe it's Adam Larson, that loses an edge. Either way, it turns into a 2-on-1 back the other way. Dunn is able to get back, but unable to break up the pass as it gets across, and Kiviranta puts it into the far side of the net without really anything Decord can do about it once again. And the Avalanche have the 3-2 lead. At which point also, and I know I said the rest of the second period was somewhat back and forth, I suppose what I actually meant was the rest of the time where the score is tied was back and forth, but this third goal that gives the Avalanche back the lead does also kind of give them back the momentum. Decord has to make a couple more nice saves, and then eventually the Avalanche get a late power play with about a minute left in the period, so the Kraken are able to kill that. Though as we get more into the third period, the Avalanche are just kind of shoring things up defensively and making sure that they don't give the Kraken much of anything on the rush, really making the neutral zone hard for the Kraken to navigate and get any kind of good chances the other way, which they just aren't able to get through the majority of this third period. They get into the offensive zone a couple of times and get the odd shot off here and there from far out, but nothing particularly dangerous that's making Blackwood work all that hard. It really takes until the Kraken get their first power play of the game, and that in its own right is a different thing. I have to say, while I can't argue with any of the calls that were made against the Kraken in this game, because they all certainly were the penalties that were called against the Kraken, there were also some things that could have easily been called against the Avalanche that weren't. It just seemed a little bit weird that the first power play for the Kraken comes this late in the game, though in the end it may not have mattered all that much, as this Kraken power play just doesn't go absolutely anywhere for the Kraken. They hardly get into the offensive end, much less get anything to the net. And although the Kraken eventually do get a couple more chances, and late in the third they do have a couple pretty good shifts in the offensive end, Kakko in particular has another good opportunity to try and chip one over the pad and in. I forget, earlier on in the third there was a breakaway chance for Schwartz that he comes up empty on, so the Kraken had some chances here and there, but nothing that even finds the net, much less the back of it. Eventually the Kraken go empty net, and it doesn't take very long for Kiviranta to find the back of it. Then just down 2 with a couple minutes left, the Kraken once again go empty net after they get possession in the offensive end. But once again, it's less than 30 seconds before the Avalanche have the puck skating the other way. They get it to Kiviranta. He gets his second empty netter and third of the game to finish off the hat trick. And that gets us to our 5-2 final score. So once again, in the end with this game, it is a game the Kraken play a lot better than really any of the other 4 losses in this losing streak. They keep right with an Avalanche team that's playing pretty well right now, and certainly is getting things turned around after the slow start to the season, which was largely due to poor goaltending. Now that they've gotten that figured out with the trades they made, and Blackwood's still playing pretty well as he was in San Jose before coming to Colorado. And there's still some issues with the Avalanche depth-wise. Their bottom 6 is really not doing much of anything for them, but the top 6 is good enough, and specifically that top line, and obviously MacKinnon, the reigning Hart winner, that it's going to make up for a lot of it, and we saw that in this game, certainly with that response goal in the second period. But anyway, the point is the Kraken played a much better game, and yes, the bar was very low coming out of especially those last 2 games, but they had some good moments in this one. There are definitely some things that you'd like to see them clean up. They let way too many rush chances back the other way, trying to press, again, I think a little bit too much offensively, especially when they didn't really have to. You got the game tied, and they're kind of making those careless plays up by the blue line and letting guys get past them. The Avalanche also had a 2-on-0 at one point in the second period that Decord had to come up with a huge save on a Makar shot. So yeah, plenty that the Kraken could still clean up, and things that they're still not playing quite to the level or anywhere near the level that they were even just on that road trip on the East Coast a couple weeks ago, or whenever they're playing their best. It's still not there, but it's a large step towards that from what we've seen over these last 2 to even 4 games in this losing streak. The bad news, of course, is that regardless of whether or not they played better or whether or not they stuck with a good Avalanche team and at least kept it close until the empty netters, the result is still the same. They get no points in the standings, again falling to now the 4 games below NHL 500, which even gives them a worse winning percentage than the Ducks, who they're technically ahead of in the standings, though the Ducks have played a few fewer games so far to this point in the season. And as far as the wild card race or the chance of getting into the playoffs, they've given themselves a very, very steep hill to climb here in the back half of the season, which is still the majority of the games. The Kraken 36 games in, giving them then still 48 games left to play, which mathematically means there's still plenty of time to make it happen. But realistically, they're already 7 points out of one of the wildcard spots and have played more games than either of the teams in those wildcard spots right now. And that's before we even start looking at some of the teams they'd have to pass, which already by points percentage again includes the Anaheim Ducks. But you've also got the Blues, who realistically, I don't think the Blues are a playoff team, so you'd think you could pass them. The Hockey Club, which we don't really know what to think of. They've been up and down all season. But then you got the Dallas Stars, who are currently out of a playoff spot, and you'd have to imagine they're going to find a way back into one of those at least wildcard spots, if not working their way back up into one of those top 3 teams in the Central. And sure, maybe you like your chances of being able to at least catch, if not pass the Flames at some point, as that's another team that I'm not necessarily convinced is a playoff team, though unlike the Kraken, they at least when they're losing games are losing them in overtime and picking up at least that one loser point fairly consistently, with already 7 on the season. But realistically, you're not really chasing the Flames because, again, the Stars are probably going to end up in a wildcard spot, if not one of the top spots in the Central, which then drops one of those other teams out. And then the Canucks are right there with the same 39 points the Flames have, but having played 1 fewer game. At least to me anyway, unless one of those teams that are currently in a playoff spot, and this is assuming that the Stars at least jump with the Flames, if not jump up into one of those spots and force another Central team down into a wildcard spot, it's going to take a collapse from one of those teams, as well as the Kraken having a pretty hot back half of the season, for them to even get into the race for one of those wildcard spots. And then you're trying to figure out which team the Kraken might be able to catch. And at least right now, it kind of seems like that might have to be the Canucks, which does make this game coming up at the end of the break a fairly important one, not only just for the Kraken to try to get something going and get off to a good start for this back half of the season coming out of the break, but also because that could just be the one team you have a chance to catch based on how things are going right now. I will say the one thing the Kraken do have going for them in trying to make that happen is that the schedule does line up for January to be one that the opportunity is there for them to pick up a whole lot of points and get off to that start that they need to in this back half of the season to try to make themselves relevant in that playoff race. Of course, at the same time, when I say the schedule opens itself up to the Kraken having some points there to be had, well, we've seen them struggle pretty mightily to collect the points that they probably should have against other teams like the Sharks, Ducks, and Blackhawks. So even when you look at a schedule that has some of those teams on it, as well as a couple games against the Sabres, the Blue Jackets, who honestly aren't playing all that bad right now, yet they don't necessarily look like gimme games anymore. They just look like games that you better win if you want any chance of even thinking about spring hockey. So if I had to be brutally honest, do I think it's going to happen? No, I really don't think it's particularly likely the Kraken are going to make the playoffs. At this point, they're going to have to go on a almost 110-point pace through the rest of the season to even get to the minimum of kind of 90 to 92 points, I think is where the absolute bottom of that potential wild card could shake out to be. If it ends up being anywhere near where it was last year at 98 points, the Kraken are going to need to be one of the absolute best teams in the NHL through the entire back half, last 48 games of the season, if they want to even get to the bottom of those wild card spots. And that means going, right now they're 4 games below 500. They're going to have to go 9-10 games better than 500 the rest of the way. And that's even with a couple of overtime losses mixed in there as well. Still, if they can't put some consistency to the way that they played on the East Coast road trip or that homestand where they went 5-1, then it is possible the team has shown that they're capable of the type of play that they need to have throughout these last 48 games in order to make it happen. The question is just whether or not they can do it anywhere near enough over the rest of the season. But anyway, that's at least how I see it right now. Let me know if you think differently down in the comments. I promised I'd say at least something about what the playoff outlook was for the Kraken as we went into the holiday break. Of course, a few games ago when I said I would do that, I was kind of expecting the Kraken to win at least one, if not two of the last 4 games going into the break, and that did not happen. They lost all 4 of them. But that's where things are right now, and hopefully they can make it happen. Hopefully they can be something akin to the St. Louis Blues from their cup run and just go on a miracle run from the start of January on. Barring that, though, we might be looking at another disappointing end to this season. Hopefully we still have some fun along the way, and at least for this game, we can close things out on a bit more of a positive note than the last 2, with some Kraken 3 stars, as always brought to you by the patrons over on Patreon. If you do want to help decide Kraken 3 stars, or sometimes if there are 3 stars, you can help support a little bit more than you already are by watching this point by going to the link down below and supporting on Patreon as well. As for this game with the first star, Chris over on Patreon and I think are in agreement that Kaapo Kakko was the most notable positive impact for the Kraken in this game. He does get the 1 goal right off the faceoff, but also had a couple of other pretty nice plays. Not only offensively, he almost scores again to tie the game late in the third, but also had a couple pretty nice defensive plays at the Kraken blue line and along the boards in the Kraken end to start breakouts the other way and break up some pressure that the Avalanche were getting going at different points in the game. So he's starting to show that the physical part of the forward game that the Kraken desperately could use more of, and he is definitely brought in partially to provide that, and in this game started to do a little bit more of it, starting to maybe feel a little bit more comfortable. I think there is a lot more that we could see positive coming from Kakko as he actually has chances to, I don't know, let's say have a full practice with the team for one thing, which he hasn't had yet. The break and a couple practices I think will really help that start to solidify a little bit more, and as we get a few more games into him getting used to play with hopefully a similar line, I think this Beniers line with he and Schwartz has some potential to be a good one going forward. Either way, at least for this game, he played very well and was a difference maker offensively and defensively. Full 200-foot game from him. Second star, I got to go with Matty Beniers, especially coming out of what was maybe, I don't know if his worst game, but one of his worst games of the season in Vegas. He looked a lot better. That whole line just flipped on its head, and I mean, McCann and Schwartz changing might have had something to do with that, though I don't really think McCann was dragging the team down a lot. Some of it was that they faced the Eichel line the entire time in Vegas and really didn't see that much of the McKinnon line in this game. Wright's line saw a lot more of the McKinnon line, I think, and they weren't necessarily as on top as Vegas was of matching up the lines exactly how they wanted to, or maybe Colorado just figured they'd put the line out that they wanted at any given time regardless of who the Kraken had out. Either way, the Beniers line looked a lot better. Night and day, 180 degrees change from how they looked in Vegas. The third star, though, I am going to go off of that line and once again go with Patreon and say Shane Wright had a very good game. He does pretty much, he does at least 80% of the work on that first goal that got the Kraken on the board, and hopefully starts to break McCann back out and get some scoring going for him. He looked a little bit more like the Jared McCann that we're used to. Even, I think, in the game in Vegas, he started to kind of take some shots that we were seeing him start to pass up on as some of that confidence seemed to be waning for him, but it seems like he's gotten over whatever the confidence is and at least shooting the puck again, so they'll start going for him here eventually. And I also wanted to give a quick honorable mention to Mahura, who looked like one of the best Kraken defensemen in this game. He really was noticeable throughout the entire course of it. Couple big hits that he's been laying here lately. Obviously, still trying to really solidify his spot as that 6th defenseman now that Borgen's gone. And so far, so good. I think he has been very good for the Kraken, even before Borgen left when he was stepping in for Dunn. Mahura has been a good depth defenseman for the Kraken and was noticeable in this game. But let me know what you think down in the comment section below. There's some other guys that I think are worth mentioning. Jaden Schwartz also played well on that line with Beniers and Kakko. Again, Decord looked pretty good for the majority of it, even if his stats aren't necessarily Decord type stats that we've gotten used to this season, or even last season for that matter. But yeah, let me know what you think down in the comments, and until next time, stay safe out there. Be good to each other, have a great holiday break, and as always, go Kraken.